Hello, friends. Welcome to Logistics of Logistics podcast. My name is Joe Lynch. Thank you so much for joining us today. Today's podcast is SOC 2 compliance for logistics with my friend Julius Tubbs. How's it going, Julius?
Pretty good. How's it going, Joe?
Doing great. So please introduce yourself and your company, where you're calling from today.
Yeah, so I'm Julius Tubbs. I'm the Senior Director of Information Security and Infrastructure at OneRail, and I'm calling from Orlando, Florida, where OneRail is headquartered.
Now, we all had a nice storm last night up here in the Great North. I suppose Orlando didn't get that, right?
Not yet. We'll look out the window and see if it's coming, but not yet. A little bit sunny down here.
Very nice. So what does OneRail do?
Well, OneRail is a third-party logistics company, or should I say last-mile logistics company, right? And so essentially, we bring your products to your door, and we help shippers all across the nation bring products to their last mile to make sure that their end users and their customers have their products within 90 minutes or less.
Yep. And by the way, I have interviewed people from OneRail before. You guys are one of my sponsors. And what I think is great is we had all these gig economy people step in during the pandemic. Definitely needed it. But what we also needed was technologists and operators, guys who said, we need people, but people need technology to be efficient and effective. And we also need operators, people who have the operational expertise. And I know that's what OneRail is bringing to the party. And so anyway, let's talk a little bit about what is SOC 2 compliance. So first off, how do I spell SOC 2 compliance?
So SOC is just SOC, right? And it stands for Service Organizational Controls. And so there's different types of SOC, SOC 1, SOC 2, SOC 3, and then different types individually. But generally we refer to it as SOC because who wants to say Service Organizational Controls all day?
Yeah, exactly. So now what is SOC 2?
So SOC 2, essentially, it's just an auditing process and procedure that companies can undergo to ensure that as a service provider, we're securely managing our clients' data as well as our data to protect the interests of both companies and in the privacy of the clients as well. And so it was actually developed by the American Institute of CPAs, AICPA. And so they defined a set of criteria that we call trust service criteria, which are security, availability, processing integrity, confidentiality, and privacy. So you get evaluated on all those different things to make sure that your security posture is where it needs to be so that you can give some level of assurance to your clients.
Yeah, and before we hit record, we were talking about it. Is OneRail is one of the big players in final mile, and millions of people are using. When you look at all the drivers, I think you guys have like 10 million drivers.
Yeah, it's a lot,
and tons of organizations. And when we're all using an app, some are using it as an app, some are using it as a tablet, some are on a PC, but we're using those tools, the risk that somehow somebody hacks into that system and is on, again, I don't know the exact numbers, but I'm guessing it could easily get into the millions of phones and tablets in Fortune 500 companies and in small 1 and 2 man shipping companies. I mean, it could be catastrophic.
It definitely could be. At the end of the day, our clients and customers, and including our internal customers, which are our employees, everyone wants to have some level of assurance that, OneRail is doing the right thing. Not just doing the right thing because it's the right thing to do, but doing the right thing because that's deep down who we want to be. And we need to continue to be that trusted partner. So ensuring that we have all the security controls, all the privacy controls, everything that we can do, making sure that it's implemented to give those drivers, to give those clients up in boardrooms the assurance that OneRail is taking all the steps that it can to protect company and client data.
Yeah. And by the way, I'm assuming all Fortune 500 companies are doing SOC 2, right?
Well, you would think. Not everyone does it, right? Sometimes companies say, hey, let's get a managed service provider, or maybe we'll have some people in IT, do some security stuff, and then, we'll implement some controls. But it takes a true commitment to say, I'm going to build a team, make sure you have a dedicated security team. And we're going to really focus on obtaining this SOC 2 because it's important, because it demonstrates that we've put in place the mechanisms to protect corporate and client data from, unauthorized use and disclosure, meaning a data breach, because it's not easy. It's a very long process. It's not only hard to get, it's hard to maintain consistently. So, companies have to look at, what are their values? Is this really important to them? And OneRail has decided that this is something that is uniquely important to us and our clients.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy when you think about it. As soon as you have a lot of employees, I know OneRail has a lot of employees down there in Orlando. As soon as you have a lot of employees, that means you're going to have employee turnover, and your customers are going to have employee turnover, and your suppliers are going to have employee turnover. And some are going to be disgruntled. Somebody might have gotten fired. Somebody might have wanted something they didn't get and they quit. A lot of those people could, I'm not saying a lot of those people, all it takes is one of those people to do something wrong, and all of a sudden security is breached if you don't do something like SOC 2 compliance. Am I right?
You're absolutely right. And there are two things to remember here, and that's, as a security practitioner and a security leader, it's important to always remember we have to develop our defenses, layered defenses, in such a way that we assume our systems will be breached, because that makes us go the extra mile, right? And then we also have to look at it. Security isn't just a technology problem. It's a people, process, and technology, but a knowledge problem. Our people are our human firewall. They're at the first line, right? So if you think about this, what SOC 2 does, it has several provisions in it and several requirements that you have to follow, and controls. And a great example of a control is just like what you said. What happens if you have someone that's separated from the company, right? You have to make sure that they can't do anything malicious, or that the data that they once had access to, they no longer have access to that. Well, what SOC 2 does is have provisions in there to make sure, are you timely removing individuals from your systems once they're separated from the company? And are you going through checklists to make sure, hey, did we remove this person from this? Are they cut off from here? Have we changed passwords? And, stuff like that, right? And so it's not enough to say, hey, are you doing this? Do you have the processes and policies in place? Right. But it's a different thing when you have a third party, an independent CPA, come in and say, great, show me your books. Let me see everything. I want to see if you actually have done this. And that's difficult, right? Because people change, processes change. But if you can open up your books and you say, hey, here's the evidence that we've done this. Here are the system logs that we've done this, to make sure that we're adhering to these controls, then it provides a level of assurance that they can check that box and say, hey, not only did you say that you were doing this because you have the policy, you've demonstrated that you actually are doing this. And that's the difficult part about a SOC 2. It's about proving it, right? And so it's about not only proving it at a point in time, but can you consistently say, hey, for 6 months to a year, we followed this practice. And that's just for one control. Have we done this? That is very difficult to do, but it takes a commitment, and it takes a full leadership team to say, hey, we want to make sure we're not only committed to it, but we're dedicated to being a trusted partner.
Yeah. So tell me, so this is what'd you say your job was again?
So I'm the senior director over information security and infrastructure, and essentially all the parts of security, risk, privacy, and compliance, as well as the IT service management. So that infrastructure component, that's what I manage.
So what is your background? How'd you get into that gig?
Right. So I actually was in the Navy in law enforcement. And then after I got out of the Navy.
That's a good background for this.
It's it provides me a little bit of insight. So after I got out, I actually worked for different retail organizations in asset protection and loss prevention, investigating organized retail crime, as well as internal theft. And so a lot of risk management, right? And so after a while, I decided this was fun, but I kind of want to transition into security. And so I transitioned into the IT and into an IT service desk role. And then I moved up and eventually became a security analyst and went up the ranks through security. And I was actually working at a financial institution and it's a funny story, a recruiter reached out to me and he's like, hey, see, you're pretty high up and you have a lot of experience. Would you be interested in this company named OneRail? Well, at the time, I was getting a lot of a lot of recruiter invitations and stuff like that. And I just ignored it. And then he reached out again and he said, probably like 2 weeks later, I really think you should look at this company. And I said, well, kind of got a cushion job right now. Kind of don't want to do this. But I decided to look at it. And once I looked at OneRail and I read about their mission, I was able to see the people, the org chart. The one thing that stuck out to me was the passion that they had and their dedication to making the company better, but their dedication to their people first. Because if you treat your people right, the rest will follow. And ultimately, once I saw that and went on interviews and met the people, Bill, Lisa, Jeff, it was a no-brainer. This is the company where I want to be, where I see myself growing, that I can do some really great work.
Yeah. By the way, I did not see you, I don't think, at Manifest. Did you go to Manifest this year?
I was not at Manifest this year. Maybe next year, but not.
Yeah, you were too busy making sure nobody breaks into the systems. But I did see Bill and Lisa Catania and many other people from OneRail at Manifest. And Manifest sponsored the beer garden. So everybody was over at the beer garden great event. And it was great. OneRail was there in spades. And by the way, this is observation. There was a ton of people at Manifest with final mile offerings, and a lot of them are startups, and there's nothing wrong with that because this is a relatively new field. We didn't say last mile or final mile until the last few years when e-commerce became increasingly important. And by the way, when I see final mile, it's not just final mile to homes anymore. There's a lot of businesses that say we sell online business to business, so it's not just direct to consumer, but not every one of these companies is big. Not every one of these companies is investing in this kind of protection for their customers and their suppliers. And I think that's significant because, again, there's potential for millions of people to be impacted if you guys don't do the right thing to protect it. Because there are always going to be, if you look at 2 million people, there's going to be some bad actors in there. And outside the organization, there's all sorts of hackers. We know this right now. Other countries in the world are hacking. Look at your email every day. When you wake up and you get all those emails, how many emails are scammy? I just got today an email saying, please pay this bill. It was through PayPal. I was like, I don't know what this is for. That's not the first time. So there's all sorts of people who spend their days trying to separate us from our money illegally. And we have governments that are trying to hack into systems and disrupt business in the United States.
Yeah, ultimately, threat actors are out there, whether they're nation states, whether they're advanced persistent threats, meaning people just out here for the joyride to cause as much havoc as they can. And you're right, a lot of the smaller companies and even some medium-sized companies, they don't not want to put in place the right security, right? And the right amount of controls. But there's a financial cost associated with, security, right? And I get that for a lot of smaller companies it's difficult. However, our customers expect a certain level of assurance, right? And because there are so many benefits to obtaining something like a SOC 2 Type 2, right? And so again, it provides assurance that OneRail, for number one, can be a trusted partner, right? It shows that we've exercised a certain level of due care and we've undergone measures to manage and improve not only our operations, our performance, the security controls, and the financial health of the company. It shows that we can give customers insight into our overall information security strategy and the steps that we've taken to maintain compliance with the latest privacy, security, and confidentiality standards. Because those things are changing every day because of, new threats, and making sure that you have like the adequate security mechanisms in place to protect the data really gives the customers a certain level of assurance that they're asking for, that, hey, OneRail has not only been tested, they've been evaluated by an independent third party on their controls, and they're also consistent in maintaining this over a period of time. That's what they're looking for in a company that's going to handle large amounts of data, and that's going to handle a large amount of their customers' data as well. That's really important. It's very hard to do, but you need to do it to be a good steward of data.
Yeah, and so someone like you, I'm sure, would say, hey, this is a must have. You must do this. And there are a lot of smaller companies in the space for your competitors, I guarantee it, who are saying, that's a nice to have. When we get to the next level, we'll do that. And that's, again, we've moved into a new world. Yesterday when we were talking, we talked about, we've all seen organizations that have problems with sexual harassment, right? And when I started working, if that was going on, it was just obviously a bad thing, but it wasn't dealt with a compliance mindset. It was like, hey, bring that guy in the office and say, this can't happen again. This is strike one. Next time I hear about this, we're going to fire you. Now, if you hear something like that, it goes up immediately through a chain of command. There's a procedure, a process that needs to be followed. This is just the nature of our business world now, is we have compliance. And I'm a logistics and supply chain operations guy. We always talk about, here's a process. Who's complying to the process and who's not? All we're doing now, and it's super important, is bringing that to the tech to make sure no one can hack us, and our loose ends don't become a breach.
It's not just compliance for the sake of compliance. I heard something one of my old bosses used to say. He said, "You think compliance is expensive? Try non-compliance." And it was like, oh yeah, I see your point there.
Yeah, bigger companies are taking care of this, but we've all remember some of that. I haven't heard one lately, but big companies that got hacked, and it cost their reputation for years, maybe decades, and then
the Target hack was one of them.
Yeah, I remember. And you kind of go, wait, how could this possibly happen? Doesn't take much, because there's hackers 24/7 trying to get in. So you said you actually get audited. Talk about how that audit looks. Would they come to the location, or is this remote? How does it happen?
Yeah, so auditing happens in a number of forms. I can tell you from experience, I've been audited at several different companies, and it's just the way that it works, right? So typically for an audit, you're going to have audit prep. And actually right now, OneRail is doing audit prep. With my team, I'm focused on that right now because we have to continue to redo SOC 2, as well as we're prepping for ISO 27001 certification. So what do audits typically look like? So it starts with an audit prep to make sure that we have all our ducks in a row, right? Make sure, are we doing the things, and have we done the things that we said that we were doing? And identifying any gaps in the company that we may have. Because if we have gaps, then we need to remediate those gaps. And so we will look through that, remediate the gaps. We will invite other team members in from the organization, other stakeholders, for parts of the business that they may need to focus on for their own part. We'll do that. Then we reach out to the auditor and say, hey, we're ready, or we think we're ready to start the audit. What they'll do is we'll have a kickoff call. They'll come in. They'll ask us some questions. We'll fill out a bunch of documentation to describe OneRail, describe the controls that we have. They'll read over everything that we're claiming. And this is why it's really important to make sure that you're truthful and you're honest, and that what you say you do, you're actually doing. Because when we say, hey, we have encryption in place at rest, or we have encryption in transit, they are going to request evidence of encryption at rest and encryption in transit in every aspect of how we do business. And we better be able to provide that. We better be able to put our money where our mouth is. And so that's typically what that looks like, is they may give us a set of, 150 requirements, or requesting that of us. And we'll have to work with various parts of the business to supply those requests and requirements to them. They're going to audit that. But not only are they going to audit to see if we gave it to them, they're also going to test the effectiveness of those controls. And that's the biggest part, is you can have all the controls. A great example, you can have a security system on your door, right? Or your car. Well, if people are just breaking in and bypassing it, it's not really effective. So you probably want to get something else. And that's essentially what they're doing. They're going to look to see, are these controls that you have in place, are they effective? And then once you're done, they're going to have a meeting. They're going to discuss their observations, and then they're going to provide you with the report. And it's either going to be favorable or it's not. And you have some work to do. Thankfully, OneRail has put in a lot of work, a lot of time, and a lot of energy, and have gotten really good reports. that we have, and we're going to continue to do so.
Yep. And you said this is done by the AICPA, which is, what is that?
So the American Institute of Certified Public Accountants, right? So they're the ones who manage.
They seem like a picky
SOC 2.
group.
Yeah. They are. They manage SOC 2, but certain firms, CPA firms, partner with them, and they're the ones who actually audit us. So
they're like an approved auditor, and they come and do
exactly
that audit for you guys.
So we have an approved auditor come out who's a certified CPA. They come out and they audit us, and they're very meticulous in their auditing.
Oh yeah, they're
they
CPAs.
Do not miss anything.
You can't gloss over anything with the CPA.
You absolutely cannot. But they're fair, but they're not going to miss anything at all. They're really going to fine tooth comb and go through everything.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you explaining this, because again, I do believe our industry, logistics and supply chain, we've seen such enormous growth in the last 5 years. During COVID, we saw the whole supply chain just transform, and we've seen the final mile, the importance of it. We didn't used to say final mile. Now I hear people saying first mile, middle mile, final mile, last mile. I never heard that on my podcast until COVID. And we grew up really quick. And I think the challenge is making sure we grew up solid, where we're not building, because I feel like this is a foundational thing. And you could be building your whole company on a tech infrastructure that's got holes. And those holes are eventually going to cause problems, except at OneRail.
Yeah, and the thing is, when you have a lot of smaller companies who are startups and starting out, it's build fast, get it going. We just have to build, right? The thing is, though, if you really want to do it and want to do it right, it's always you design a system with security and privacy in mind. So that means when you are designing it, when you're developing it, when you're deploying it, this needs to be at the forefront. But that's very difficult and hard to do, because if you're building something, you're not really always worried about security or privacy. You're just trying to get this thing off the ground, make money, and show that you have something that the market wants, right? And so a lot of companies end up putting security in later and thinking about privacy later. And whether that's the right approach or not, that security and that tech debt is going to come due one day. And so, we at OneRail focus on making sure that privacy and security, it's in our thoughts as we build something and prior to building it. In our design decisions, in our requirements, we talk about security, confidentiality, and privacy immediately, because we know this is what our customers are going to ask of us, and this is what is required by the industry.
This is you working with the big boys. I mean, I'm going to have a separate conversation with you guys about Gartner. You guys did real well on Gartner. I guarantee if they don't already measure that, they're going to start measuring that, because again, we grew up fast in this industry, and there's been a lot of tech. And by the way, I had this conversation with you yesterday. A lot of technology in the past always kind of was like the lone hacker guy who's just worked all night, fueled by caffeine, building something. And I'm sure there's still a lot of that goes on, but that doesn't speak to compliance. When you have this mindset of, launch fast and figure it out later, that's good. That gets things to market. But as soon as you start having a large customer base and a whole bunch of suppliers who are depending on you, you got to grow up.
Yeah, you got to grow up real fast, because at the end of the day, and I can tell you from firsthand, when I review contracts, when they come across my desk, I'm looking at them as a security risk and compliance perspective. And one of the things that I always see is customers want to know, do you maintain a SOC 2 Type 2 or an ISO certification? Can you validate and that you following industry security standards? And to do that, they're going to want to make sure through their own third-party risk management process, does OneRail have these things? And if a company hasn't done those things, it's going to be very hard to then stop what you're doing and say, hey, we have to go put all this stuff in place if we want to play with the big boys. And you're not going to be able to play with them if you don't have stuff in place. It's going to take you a longer time.
I got to think, as you approach those Fortune 500 companies, they're saying, I want this. So for companies like OneRail, it's probably a nice, more than a nice to have. It's a must have, because you're working with Fortune 500 companies that say, we are spending the money to make sure we're SOC compliant, which means we're going to have to require that of our logistics companies.
Yeah, and actually one of the provisions in SOC do require you to collect SOC 2s and other security attestations and compliance documents from the company. So even our own third-party vendors that we use, when I evaluate them and onboard them, the first thing that I'm doing is, do you have a SOC 2 or do you have ISO? And not having a SOC 2 or an ISO, it's very difficult to move past our process to work with us if a company doesn't have one, because our customers are going to expect that we have it. And then anyone that we work with, we're going to expect that they have it, because we know exactly what they go through to get their SOC 2 because we went through it. And that gives us a level of assurance that all their ducks are in a row.
Excellent. Excellent. Well, I appreciate you taking the time, Julius, and explaining this. I've heard lately, I heard SOC 2 thrown around a lot. And I also, what was the other? Scope 3, I think that's an emissions thing. And I was like, I don't know what any of that is, but people kind of mentioned on my podcast. So I was like, I know it's important. I just don't know what it is. So I appreciate you explaining it. And I think it's super important, obviously. And it's something I think we're going to hear a lot more about in the coming years.
Definitely. I absolutely believe so.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time, sir.
All right. Thank you, Joe. I definitely appreciate it.
Yep. And thank all of you for listening to my podcast. Your support's very much appreciated. Until next time, onward and upward. You have been listening to the Logistics of Logistics podcast, where we engage with leaders in the logistics and supply chain community. If you like what you hear, please subscribe, hit the like button, and leave us a nice review on Apple or Spotify or wherever else you listen. Also, please check out our videos on YouTube and connect with us on LinkedIn. We're very big on LinkedIn. And you can also reach us on the logisticsoflogistics.com, our website.